Good morning. So continuing, coming to the conclusion of the overview of Chassidus, especially Chassidus Chabad. So we covered the Baal Shem Tov, the Magi, the Alter Rebbe, the Mittler Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, the Rebbe Marash, the Rebbe Rashab, the Frierdiker Rebbe. And the last class, I covered the output of the literature material that was the extensive material that was written and published by the Rebbe. Our Rebbe, the seventh generation, talked about the Mamorim, the Sikhs, the letters, the Rishimis, the different publications that he himself composed or began to compose. I just wanted, before I go into the methodology of how the Rebbe is the seventh Chabad Rebbe, so to speak, continues the evolution of Chassidus, I wanted to talk about a few other things that the Rebbe did in the area of publishing that was not directly written by the Rebbe, but was published. As we discussed, the Rebbe was a publisher. And as such, a second, please. Yeah. And as such, he actually published materials. Some of them he wrote himself, like Hayom Yom, the Haggadah, the different indexes we spoke about. I should also add that the Rebbe was copious footnotes that he wrote to the Maimorim and discourses of the Frierdiker Rebbe, as well as previous Rabbeim. So over the years, the Rebbe would publish different Maimorim, and he often would write footnotes in addition to an introduction that always came at the beginning of each of these publications, these journals that would come out for Shabbos or for a Yom Tov. So even, for example, Bassi Lagani of the Frierdiker Rebbe has notes of the Rebbe below, footnotes. I didn't mention that, I believe. But then there were things that the Rebbe published that he himself either edited but did not write. For example, in the early 40s, as the head of Merkez L'Inyanei Chinuch, which was the center of educational, Merkez L'Inyanei Chinuch, how do they translate it into English? The Center for Educational Affairs. The Rebbe published a monthly magazine that was called Talks and Tales for Children. Schmusen for Kinder. Talks and Tales for Children, both in Yiddish and in English. So there, the Rebbe may have written some of it, but it was primarily edited by, I mentioned, Dr. Nissim Mendel. He was on the staff of the Frierdiker Rebbe Secretariat, and then later the Rebbe. And he was responsible for a lot of the editing and writing. So he wrote a number of books that came out by Kahos. Kahos was the publication arm, as I mentioned. Many of these books and magazines or journals were edited by the Rebbe. So that was one thing that came out monthly for years. This went on till the late 90s, I believe. So many volumes of that magazine for children. It was, we used to get it in the mail. I used to remember, enjoyed it. It was 8 pages, maybe 10 pages, 8 pages. It had stories, it had customs, it had laws, it had a cartoon for a certain period of time. It was geared to children. It had something on science, nature's wonderland and nature's wonderland, and lessons from nature and science in our lives. And overall, it was that was one thing. In addition, the Rebbe published different booklets and pamphlets for children for the holidays, like the history of Pesach, the history of Shavuos, history of Sukkot for the holidays, as well as other educational materials that were published, especially for children, but some things were also for adults. I mentioned Kovitz Lubavitch, I already mentioned in the previous class, but there were other I'm just thinking what other books came out at the time. There were also other books that were published by Kahos, again, by various authors, in addition, of course, to the translation of Tanya into English by various translators, as well as the philosophy of Chabad by Dr. Nissim Mendel, and other books that were either reviewed or even edited, sometimes just published by the Rebbe, meaning by Kahos. And some of them we actually have the Rebbe's notes and edits on them, some we don't. But that is another element, another thing that was another output of Chabad publications. What else can I add to that? Well, over the years, let me see. I should add one more thing. From the Rebbe's talks, I mentioned Likutei Sichos, I mentioned the Sichos Kodesh, the Yiddish and Hebrew, and in different languages. There were also some books that were published that were specifically, for example, all the Rebbe's explanations on the Rambam. That was printed in a sefer called Yain Malchus. Let's see, three volumes. The Maimorim of the Rebbe were published in Sefer Maimorim Melukot, as well as later in volumes connected to the holidays. There was a book published by Yonei Yeshua, which was all the Rebbe's talks on Sukkot, Simchas Beis HaShe'eva, every night of Sukkot, that the Rebbe began delivering in 1980, Sukkot 1980. So these are more collections of the Rebbe on a particular topic or a particular holiday. And there are many other books that were like collections made in an organized way on topics like on the Rebbe and education. Of course, a book like my own, Toward a Meaningful Life, is taken from the Rebbe's teachings. It's my book, but it's distilled from the Rebbe's teachings. And other books that have been written. Sichos in English is a publishing house that publishes translations of the Rebbe's talks as well as thematic subjects, many books that they published. Quite a few of them are also included in the bibliography at the back of Toward a Meaningful Life, where I listed all the books up to date that came out based on the Rebbe's teachings. Okay, I think that covers the scope of the actual teachings. What I want to address now is the methodology. And in the same context, what each of the Rebbe's particular unique style. Now, this is always said with some trepidation and some qualification, because unless we heard it directly from a Rebbe, it's a responsibility to be able to. Just 1 second, please. Yeah. It's a responsibility to be able to quantify and say definitively that this is the style of the Alter Rebbe, the Mittler Rebbe. There's a lot of overlap. So we do know that the Alter Rebbe is Chachma, Mittler Rebbe Bina. So certain things we could identify, certain things the Rabbeim themselves pointed out, like they called the Rambam, the Rebbe Rashab, the Rambam of Chassidus. So we can use that as a reference point and a springboard to elaborate what that means. With the Rebbe, being that we really never heard from the Rebbe his own analysis of his contribution, this is what is the consensus, more or less, that I learned through the years that I did my work in writing the Rebbe's Farbrengens and studying them, as well as researching and annotating and working with the other experts in the field, including Rabbi Sholom, Rabbi Yoel Khan, who was an original Chayzer, came to the United States in 1950. So he was right at the beginning when the Rebbe assumed leadership, and he was like the veteran expert on the Rebbe's teachings. So the consensus is essentially, being that the Rebbe's Malchus, corresponding to the seventh generation, is Malchus, the last of the spheres. So what is the role of Malchus in the spheres? So we know on one hand, Malchus leslo megamaklum, like the moon, it doesn't have any light of its own. On the other hand, it channels all the light of the sun, reflects it and channels it into Biyah, into Bri, Yitzir, and Asiyah. So one thing you see clearly in the Rebbe's teachings, this type of all-encompassing nature. Whereas the Frierdiker Rebbe, even though all the Rabbeim, as Frierdiker Rebbe, for example, built his Maimorim on all the Rabbeim before, but you see primarily the Rebbe Rashab. The Mittler Rebbe, of course, was primarily the Alter Rebbe. There was no one else before him in the Chabad. The Rebbe, on the other hand, different, and I'll discuss it more in detail in a moment, really brought from all the Rabbeim. And you see it especially in the Maimorim Abasa Legani, which is like you can call the trademark, the cornerstone, the Maimon the Rebbe would say every year, based on the Frierdiker Rebbe's Hemshech of 20 chapters that was published in that Shabbos, beginning that Shabbos, Yud Shvat of Tafshin Yud, 1950. So you see how the Rebbe brings all the Rabbeim there. the Baal Shem Tov, the Magid, Alter Rebbe, Mittler Rebbe, Tzemach Tzedek, Rebbe Marash, Rebbe Rashab, the Frierdiker Rebbe, of course, is the Maimer itself, Bas Legani. And you see it elsewhere as well, in letters of the Rebbe. You'll always refer to all the Rabbeim. Rosh Hashanah Farbrengens, they would sing all the Negunim of all the Rabbeim, as well as other occasions. And this was a common thread. So the Rebbe was like Malchus, which takes everything from Chochmah, Bina, all the way, Das, through Chesed, Gvura, Tefer, Netzach, Chayd, Yesod, and channels it, and draws it down. That's one thing you see. So it's also a certain Achdus. Like as we see in the Rebbe's style as well, you see a connection of Pshat, Remez, Drush, Sod, even more than the Tzemach Tzedek. Remember, Malchus is also the middle rod. It's Keser, Teferes, Das, Yesod, and Malchus. So Malchus also has that element of uniting and being a harmonizing, a harmony of all the spheres. Knesset Yisrael. And you see the connection how the Rebbe would connect all Chelkei HaTorah. If you study the Rebbe's teachings, you see he connects all the different methods in Torah. Pshat, literal, like the Rashi Sichos of the Rebbe, which was always Pshut Shel Mikra. But he would always connect it, the Rebbe also connects it to Remez, which is more allegorical interpretation. Drush is more the hermetical, the homiletic and the hermetical interpretations from the Talmud, Halacha, and so on. And of course, Sod, the Samach, the mystical, the esoteric, and the Pnimius. And you can see it in every talk that the Rebbe delivered, whatever level he was discussing it, whether it was a piece in the Talmud, or a Rambam, or a Rashi, he always brought it back to what is the Pnimius of it, the Pnimius HaTorah, and always with the biggest emphasis, Heira b'poil. Torah Meloshen Heira. As I mentioned a number of times, the most repeated phrase that the Rebbe repeated more than any other in all the Farbrengens was Torah's Meloshen Heira, which is also a Malchus characteristic and trait, because Malchus brings it down into action. The faculties of Chabad and Chagas and Nehi are faculties, but Malchus is what draws it into Machshava, Dibra, Maisa, and ultimately Maisa. Through Malchus, you create the next world, Bria, Yitzira, Asiya. Malchus of every world is the channel and the interface between a higher world and the next world. And you see that as well in the Rebbe's focus on the action. So this does not mean that the Rabbeim did not focus on action. All the Maimorim always have lessons in Avodas Hashem, obviously, starting from Tanya itself. But that emphasis, that extra emphasis, that literally in all parts of Torah, to bring in Torah, you see it much more amplified in the Rebbe's works. Another aspect that should be mentioned is the focus on what Malchus, we know Chassidus talks about Malchus is rooted all the way in Keser Malchus. So even though Malchus is the last of the spheres, the seventh, it's rooted in the highest of the spheres. Seif Maisa b'machshava tchila. That the beginning of the thought is Seif Maisa, the end of the action, is rooted in the beginning of the thought. No, it's tchilasam b'seif, and the beginning is wedged in the end. Because the ultimate kavana is bringing it down into Asiya, into Tachtenim. And that indeed, when you look in the first Maimer of Basel Legani of the Rebbe, Tafshin Yural, 1951, what does he say? We are the seventh generation from the Alter Rebbe, whose role it is, like the seventh generation of Moshe Rabbeinu from Avram, whose role it is to v'asili migdash v'shachanti b'seicham. Until Moshe, the six previous generations did not build a Mishkan. They serve God in very high levels. They mamshich and megala lakus. They drew down and revealed godliness in this world. But building a Mishkan, a physical temple and sanctuary, where God says, V'shachanti b'seicham, which came after Matan Torah, is the seventh generation Moshe. And the Rebbe says the same thing by us. The seventh generation from the Alter Rebbe will finish the work of building and bringing the Beis HaMikdash Hashlishi, the third Beis HaMikdash, with the coming of Mashiach. So you see from that even though all the Rabbeim work toward that, but Malchus is the ultimate final step in the process. And that's why you see the accelerated discussion about Mashiach and the Geula, that is the last generation of Golus, the first generation of Geula. And all the activities that the Rebbe did, all the campaigns, all the Mivtzoyim, We're all geared in that direction, the finishing steps, the finishing touches, as the Rebbe put it. Zu puts in the kneplach, to polish the buttons and finish the job. And as the years went on, especially in the late 80s and early 90s, the Rebbe began to accelerate that discussion, that we're closer than ever, literally on the threshold. Words like the world is ready, all we have to do is open our eyes. The birurim are finished. Im duhachin kulcham, we've already polished the buttons. And many other similar, higias man gulaschem, the time of your geula has arrived. Many other phrases like that from Chazal, and looking at the world around us. And indeed, when you look at the world that the Rebbe was leader in is a very different world than his six predecessors. All the Rabbeim before the Rebbe, most of their lives, if not all of it, was under oppression. The Alter Rebbe was under the Tsar, Mittler Rebbe, the same, all the way till the Rebbe Rashab was all under Tsarist regime. And we know the Tsars were not exactly lovers of Jews, so they dealt with pogroms and they dealt with decrees and expulsions and all kinds of zoning, whatever, all the different things they did to harm Jews. The Rebbe Rashab lived through the Russian Revolution, which was just going from the fire into from the frying pan into the fire. The Bolsheviks, who basically outlawed religion, with of course Stalin coming to power, the Frierdiker Rebbe's arrest. Yes, the Frierdiker Rebbe finally got out of there, but then he went right to Europe, and Nazi Europe emerged. The last 10 years of Frierdiker Rebbe's life was still in the middle of, half of it was through World War II. The last 5 years, you can say, was some relatively after World War II. The Rebbe began his leadership in 1950, essentially a time of freedom for Jews. And ever since, we've only seen the renaissance of Jewish life. We have challenges, and we have our enemies, but it's no longer in any institutionalized oppression like it was a threat. The mere fact how we learn Torah, whether it's in the United States or other countries in the world, and of course Israel. So the Rebbe lived in a time which radically was different than Jews have lived for thousands of years. Maybe unprecedented, actually, the freedoms we have. So for the Rebbe, all these were signs, including the technological revolutions, the political freedoms, religious freedoms, and many other signs. The fall of the Soviet Union in 1990, peacefully, the Iraq War, many, many different signs that the Rebbe showed was indicators that were literally at the threshold, which is a Malchus Dike statement, because that's Malchus, that's Der Ashvi. That's the seventh and last generation before Geula. So this is also reflected in the Rebbe's Torah. You can see it everywhere. When you study it, especially when you study all of it, you see these patterns emerge. Now, as far as the actual chassidus of the Rebbe, both in Maimorim and Sichos, so of course, like all the Rabbeim, the Rebbe added to what the Rabbeim before him had taught. And sometimes you see very significant chidushim, innovations that the Rebbe added in his Maimorim and Sichos, where he would take a Maimer from the Alter Rebbe, or all the way to the Frierdiker Rebbe, through all the Rabbeim, and would say, literally, you can say the meaning in this piece, in Tanya, or in a Maimer in Tere'er, or Kutei Teira, and so on, means so and so, and he would add his explanations. We have chidushim from the Rebbe, actual chidushim chassidus itself, but one of the things that jumps out is the Rebbe's focus on atzmos. Even though the Rabbeim before, starting from the Alter Rebbe, speak about atzmos, but much more sparingly and not that common. The Rebbe Rashab does begin to elaborate more about atzmos, as well as the Frierdiker Rebbe, and the Rebbe took it to another level. So there again, you see the idea of Malchus, which is rooted all the way in the highest levels of Keser, Eishes Chayil, Ateres Bailo, which is rooted, as we've learned in Ayin Beis, Keser is rooted all the way in the highest levels of Lifnei Tzimtzum, because when you come to the end of the process, and Mashiach is about to come, obviously the highest levels of Giluyim go all the way higher than all the Giluyim of Everest is the Gilui Etzem. So it makes total sense that the Rebbe would speak about Atzmus more, because we're talking about the end of the process, where there will be a Dira B'Tachtenim, V'Osel Migdash V'Shachanti B'Seicham, the Beis HaMikdash Ashlishi, a permanent Beis HaMikdash, with all the expressions of how Lukus and Atzmus will be in Tachtenim. There'll be a Dira Loyla Atzmuse B'Tachtenim. that Atzmus will reside and dwell in this lowest of worlds. So indeed, you see things about Atzmus that the Rebbe spoke about that you don't find in previous Maimorim. But it's all based on many things the Rebbe says. You could find a Maimer from the Frierdiker Rebbe either hinted to or very open and direct, the Rebbe Rashab. But nevertheless, the Rebbe added many different points. Again, this is not a discussion now what all these additions are. That deserves its own discussion. I've done that other times. Just wanted to emphasize some of these chidushim. There's also sugyas in Chassidus and Hashkafa and the Jewish philosophy that the Rebbe addressed that were not addressed quite as extensively or at all in earlier generations. For example, the concept of bchira, free will. So you find it in Maimorim. Maimorim talk about free will, but the Rebbe has much more elaboration on free will. Hashgacha pratis. Again, you'll find it in the Maimorim, but the Rebbe has an entire essay on Hashgacha pratis, actually. It's one of the letters that he wrote, but it was also in the form of an essay. Discuss that as well. Many other topics. Talk about non-Jews. So of course there, being that Mashiach's coming and Malchus is not just Malchus Melech Yisrael, but Melech al Kol Haaretz, meaning a king over the entire world. So preparation for Mashiach, the last 10 years of the Rebbe's, before the Rebbe's, before Chav Zayin Adar and then Gimel Tammuz, was a lot of material on the Sheva Mitzvahs Bnei Noach and non-Jews, more than any of the Rabbeim that ever before. But this also fits very much into the pattern of the Rebbe's focus on bringing the Geula and the last generation in Golus and first generation in Geula. And that the non-Jewish world is receptive to hearing this, as he said a number of times, the Rebbe did, that the world is ready. So that those are some among many other themes that the Rebbe spoke about. I mean, just for example, current events, obviously, that happened in the Rebbe's time were not discussed in the previous generations. But if you still look deeper into Chassidus, you'll find addressing even the last Birurim of Yishmael and Esav, which essentially is the Muslim Arab world, and Esav, the Christian Western Roman world. So you find that discussed. The Rebbe discussed it a little more openly than in previous generations. So that is yet another part of the subject matter. And there's more. When I start going into it, you find more and more discussion, addressing especially a lot of nuances that were not always so clear in the 6 generations of Chassidus Chabad beforehand. And part of this was also due that we asked questions to the Rebbe and essentially evoked, even more than the Rebbe himself offered initially. Sometimes the Rebbe insisted that we ask questions, and those questions brought out even more deeper concepts that were not understood or not fully defined and unpacked in the previous Chassidus of previous generations. As I said, it deserves its own discussion. Many of these items, I've mentioned them a number of times throughout our classes. I just wanted to give a general overview of these editions of the Rebbe. Now, and finally, of course, the very compelling statements that the Rebbe made, especially starting in 1990, 91, 92, that I've done all that I can do, now it's your job to do what you can do. Of course, that again fits to the end of the process. That the process that the 6 Rabbeim before the Rebbe, the 7 Rabbeim, including the Rebbe, what they did, and now the ball is in our court, so to speak, to do what we can to bring the Geula, to bring all the Chassidus of this previous generations, including the Rebbe's generation, and bring it to the world around us, which is essentially the basis of this class and so many other classes out there, Yefutzu Meinesecha Chutza, which remains the mandate that was given to us when Mashiach told the Baal Shem Tov that he'll come when the Mayonis, Meinesecha, your wellsprings of Chassidus, will spread outward, and the Rebbe emphasized outward means Chutza Shein Chutza Mimena, to the farthest outskirts of earth, literally to every person, every corner of this earth. And that's where we are. So there we have 7 generations of Chabad Chassidus, preceded by 2 generations of Chassidus Klolis, a total of 9 generations, where you have a full body of literally hundreds and hundreds of books, thousands of pages of material that's all part of one corpus, one big picture that gives us a blueprint, a comprehensive blueprint for life, a comprehensive blueprint that distills and draws from all parts of Torah, going back all the way to the Matan Torah, Moshe Rabbeinu, what was taught the written Torah, the oral Torah, the Mishnah, the Talmud, all the generations that followed, the Rabbanan Savaroi, Rishenim, Achreinim, and of course, especially the revelation of Kabbalah, starting with the Zohar and prior to that, all the way through the Arizal to the Baal Shem Tov, and the explanations of Kabbalah, Primis HaTorah through Chassidus, making it practical and applying it to our lives. As I said, Torah Meloshen Hera. So that is somewhat the picture, with the Rebbe, of course, being the culmination of this process, the seventh generation, Malchus. And when you think about it, it really becomes a very eloquent and a very systematic and organized structure, which I've just barely, I touched upon it, more than touched. I gave an overview of it, but as you can imagine, there's so much more that can be said as you break it down into details. So I hope I did some justice to it, enough to give you, to whet your appetite, that you can go and look into it more. And one of my goals here was to lay out the map, so to speak, the lay of the land of what Chassidus is. So when you study, whatever you're studying, whatever mimer you're studying, whatever sikh or whatever that you're learning, you can fit it into where does that belong in this map, starting from the Baal Shem Tov all the way to the Rebbe, and the different ways that they communicated and the different literature they produced, the different books, the different writings, different talks, and how they all come together, as I said, in one beautiful panorama, one beautiful tapestry and symphony. So with that, I will stop here if anybody wants to ask any questions, either on what I said now about the Rebbe or anything said from the previous generations of the Rabbeim. But as I've said a number of times, they all are one. At the end of the day, though it's 9 different Nisim, 9 generations, the truth is they're all one, as the Rebbe says, a Mo'er. The Mo'er of the Rabbeim is one. The Oyer of the Rabbeim can be different. The light that they shine, each according to their generation. But in essence, it's like a Spastusha de Moshe b'chol dara v'dara. In every generation you have a Moshe, it's one Moshe. That Moshe you find in every generation takes on the form and shape that fits for that generation, and therefore the unique style and the unique approach. But they're essentially all one Torah, from one leader, from one Hashem, that is driving it all, but that the oneness all comes into diversity to fit the different colors and shades and hues of the diversity, that reflect the diversity, tailored to the diversity of all of us, being that we're different people, but different Ein Deis Ein Shavas, different perspectives and different needs, and in different times in our lives. So you have both the unified principle plus its full diversity. So again, with that, I open the floor. Anybody wants to ask anything or comment?
I have a question. You know, like Basi Agani, the Frierdiker Rebbe started and then the Rebbe expanded. Is there one mimer or one pasuk that the Alter Rebbe starts and then you could see systematically each Rebbe adding to it, and be able to learn the different styles?
Absolutely. I mentioned when I started this exercise that one of my dreams is to show exactly that. The Alter Rebbe was obviously the founder of Chassidus Chabad, so he established all the sugyas. Sugyas means the themes, and he said them in his Maimarim, and you can literally trace how it develops in the Mittler Rebbe's Maimar, then in the Tzemach Tzedek, the Rebbe Marash, Rebbe Rashab, Frierdiker Rebbe, and the Rebbe. Some places it's very obvious, some you have to do a little more research. But we did, for example, Magbi L'Sheves, Mika Hashem L'Gbeno, HaMagbi L'Sheves, the Chanukah Maimer, indicates in Torah Eir, with its beer, its explanation. We studied that inside. We learned the Mittler Rebbe 75-page Maimer on that Maimer, and we learned it in Ayin Beis, how Ayin Beis developed it. Now, of course, I also mentioned Tzemach Tzedek adds to it. The Rebbe Marash didn't find so much on it, but there's definitely, he talks about it. So you can trace every mimer from the Rebbe all the way back to the Alter Rebbe, and of course the other direction. The way it would work is you start with the Alter Rebbe laying out the main themes and seeing how they evolve and develop. That would be a pretty big contribution to work. It's not a simple matter. You probably need a team and staff to do that. I don't think one person could just do it. But I do it all the time when I teach. If you recall, in Ayin Beis, many times I would say this piece is based on, or sometimes actually a quote from, a mimer from the Rebbe Marash or the Tzemach Tzedek or Mittler Rebbe and the Alter Rebbe with additions. So sometimes, again, you see it very clearly. Sometimes you need a little more research to find it. But yes, there's no question that can be done and should be done. A proper study of any sugi and chassidus, when I study something, I'm always looking at all the rabbeim, what they say on this topic. When we learn Samach Vav, I'll do the same thing, and the same thing with every mimer that you learn. Today, thank God, they're beginning to publish the Maimorim with footnotes. So the footnotes often say which mimer this is based on. So you'll learn a mimer, it'll say this mimer is based on a mimer from the previous Rebbe or and sometimes the Rabbeim themselves repeated a mimer with differences. The Rebbe, for example, Basi Lagani, there it's very direct because every year the Rebbe would explain one chapter of Basi Lagani. So there it's as direct as it gets.
Thank you.
But sometimes on Basi Lagani's example, when it was a Shabbos, the Rebbe sometimes said the same mimer on, let's say, chapter 5 or chapter 10 or whatever, on Friday night sometimes in the earlier years, Shabbos day and Motzei Shabbos, and sometimes later in the week, and with variations. So the Rebbe would say the same mimer with different additions, each one, and we would write them all, obviously. In one year, 1977, the Rebbe actually said to combine two of the versions. The one was said Shabbos and the one said Motzei Shabbos into one mimer, and at the bottom there's like notes of what the Rebbe added in a different mimer. So there's a lot to say on this topic. Basically, if you ever want to study a mimer, it's not difficult to find the sources, where it originates from. And if you ask me, I'm happy to share if I know, but it's pretty easy to find in footnotes or there are other ways that it can be researched.
Yeah, one systematic chain would be a great thing, like you said, to see. I have a tiny question.
Of course.
Sefer Halikutim Dach Tzemach Tzedek. I thought you said that I happen to have a copy at home, and I thought you said it's on a pasuk, but here it's listed as just words.
It's not on psukim. It's an encyclopedia on an Aleph Beis order entries. It's not on psukim.
Right, but it's just words. It's one word entry.
It's on theme. It's on ideas.
One word ideas, though. It's not like a phrase or anything.
Doesn't need to be a phrase. Oir, Mamala Kalam, Sevav Kalam. It's like an encyclopedia. You know, encyclopedias are always on one word. Snow, rain.
Okay, so for example,
obviously strong.
So, for example, if I had a question, let's say that Avraham said to Sarah, "Tell them that you're my sister." It's Darsheni. So, if I want to see what the Rebbeim say
I would
about
go to either Avram or Sarah.
And how do I know it's going to deal with that specific question?
That's where it would be. How do you know anything? If there's something on it, you'll find it there.
Okay, thank you.
That's part of the research. Now, there are psukim in the Torah that the Chassidus maybe not explained really, so obviously Sefer Likutim is not going to have on it. But anything that Tzemach Tzedek wrote about will be there, and it's simply any topic you want. But it's not on psukim. It's based on. But you remember, indexes of Maimorim in the Sifra Maimorim don't have the index. Often includes the psukim. So if you want a particular pasuk, you could look at the back of Torah, for example, on this verse, to Avram and Sarah. But that would be through individual svarim. Sefer Likutim is an encyclopedia of 35 volumes or so. So it includes everything. Like in a good encyclopedia, it's on entries, meaning words, yeah.
So there's no such, I'm sorry, just one tiny little follow-up. So there's no such sefer that of phrases. It's always just words?
I don't know what you mean by phrase. You mean a verse in the Torah?
Yeah, a verse in the Torah.
A verse in the Torah. You have to look at the indexes. There is also a sefer called Toildos Aaron, but that's a little more complicated, where you can go by verse and see where it says, but it's not going to tell you what it says. It'll just tell you the page numbers. But the best way is Sefer Likutim, in my opinion.
Thank you.
If you want to go by books, you have to go into each book and look for the pasuk. In the back, there'll be like a Likutei Torah. You'll see a psukim or other svarim. Okay.
Thank you.
I had a question just on the theme, or it's a whole metaphysical charge of Dir B'Tachtonim, and although it's in Sefer Atanya, it seems to have become a more prevalent theme, starting with the Frierdiker Rebbe and then picked up by the Rebbe, like, and specifically with the Myron Bassi Lagani really brings it home. Um, I'm wondering if you would say that there was a greater emphasis on this theme as we go into Dor HaShvi'i, so in the seventh millennium. Do you think that in Chassidus Chabad there has been a shift in emphasis, let's say over the past 100 years, toward Dir B'Tachtonim as compared against, let's say, beginning with Tanya, where it's mentioned as a fundamental concept, but it's not pressed at so many different levels and access points and angles.
I think I mentioned that before myself. I said that.
Oh, okay. Can you repeat it? I'm sorry.
I wouldn't say the Frierdiker Rebbe more than other, because I said Rebbe's Malchus. Malchus is mamshich everything into Biyah, into Asiyas. I spoke about Torah Meloshen Hara. I spoke a whole arichas about the Rebbe's emphasis on bringing it into Tachtenim, that the seventh generation, our job is to make, like the seventh generation of Moshe, to build the Beis HaMikdash HaShlishi, and not rebuild it, but to make the world into a world that's ready to go into Geula. So basically, Dira B'Tachtenim is a central theme in Torah in general, all the way from Moshe Rabbeinu's times. The Alter Rebbe in chapter 36 and 37, central theme as well. In the Rabbeim speak about it quite extensively, much more than you may think. But the Rebbe, like he said in his first mimer, that we are the seventh generation to finish the job. So it makes sense that the Rebbe put a lot of emphasis on Dir B'Tachtenim. And there are more details that the Rebbe adds that, like I talked about other things that the Rebbe adds to it that were not discussed earlier, or nuances, or meanings of understanding what the word Dira means, Tachtenim. But a lot of it is based, if you learn all the Chassidus, you start seeing in the Mittler Rebbe, there's a lot more in Dira B'Tachtenim than many people know. The Rebbe, obviously, as I said, I would say it was more, probably more emphasis because, again, it's the end process.
Understood. Thank you. It's very helpful.
Okay.
If you would, Rabbi Jacobson, if you would,
you'll see Samach Vav. Just 1 second. We're going to be learning Samach Vav. The beginning of Samach Vav, Dira B'Tachtenim is very central, and it becomes a central theme of the whole Samach Vav. So that's the Rebbe Rashab.
Yeah, helpful. Eliezer, your turn.
Yes, Rabbi Jacobson, if you had chosen to, instead of Samach Vav, to do the Rebbe's Torah, like with a 3 or 4 year project, so to speak, what would you have chosen? By Inyanim, by specific Mamorim, by Mulukat? What would you have chosen, if I could ask?
If we were going to do it ongoing, I'd do them all. I wouldn't do only a few. I would do them all because they cover different topics. All the Mamorim together, I would not say are as comprehensive as Ayin Beis, for example, or Samach Vav, but they definitely cover very central themes. And as I said, they already take it to the next level beyond the Rebbe Rashab and the Frierdiker Rebbe in many, many nuances. I don't know. I mean, there's so many ways to go about it. See, the Rebbe's Maimorim are not organized like a Hemshech. It's not like a series of Maimorim, let's say like Ayin Beis, where Keser is the central theme, interface, and then the Rebbe Rashab develops it in so many different ways. The Rebbe's Maimorim are more individual. Obviously, when you learn them all, you get a bigger picture. But that's why it would be a lot more work to see that bigger picture, because you learn a Maimer finished. We learned last month, the Maimer of the Yom Kippur Maimer, said on Shabbos Shuvah, but it was Yom Kippur Maimer. So it's a self-contained Maimer and talks about a lot of different themes. And as that, then comes another Maimer. In a few places, the Rebbe did have a Hemshech of 3 Maimorim, sometimes 4 Maimorim, and so on. I from a point of view of learning Chassidus, I would definitely go with the Rebbe Rashab before the Rebbe, not because of any, God forbid, lack of the Rebbe's depth, because it's like the Rambam of Chassidus. The Rebbe Rashab just organizes it in that fullest sense of the word. Then when you learn the Maimorim of the Rebbe, you could start seeing the Rebbe's additions to it. There are people who argue that everything should be learned through the lens of the Rebbe's Maimorim, and through the Rebbe you could see already the Rebbe Rashab and the Frierdiker Rebbe and the previous Rabbeim as well. There are those that do say that. I heard once from Rabbi Groner that the Rebbe said to him once, the Rebbe was holding a kuntrus, a new mimer had come out. I mean, it was not new. A Rebbe Rashab's mimer was a new publication of it that was just published, and the Rebbe was very excited. Whenever the Rebbe, a new publication came out, he would hold it all day. That's what Rabbi Groner said. The Rebbe was very much into it. And the Rebbe said to him, you can't understand Chassidus without the Rebbe Rashab. So Rabbi Groner said, what about the Rebbe's Maimor? So the Rebbe said, Mitzadis Kashus is a different thing. In other words, learning the Rebbe's Maimorim has another element. It's our Rebbe. So there's a certain chvivus, preciousness of your own Rebbe. Even though Rebbe Rashab is also our Rebbe, but in our generation, the Rebbe that we relate to. So what I take from that is not that the Rebbe's Maimorim don't have fundamental Chassidus in them, but it's interesting. The Rebbe Rashab organized all of Chassidus in a way, sugyas, that you can learn. Like, for example, you want to understand the concept of interface that we learned in Ayin Beis. Yes, you learn the sichos and Maimorim of the Rebbe, you're going to find ultimately, but not the way the Rebbe Rashab does it, a comprehensive picture of over 1,470 pages on it in so many different ways. So, in general, the best way to learn Chassidus is, of course, like we just spoke, is start with the Alter Rebbe and go to each Rebbe. But that's just not practical for most of us. It would just take too much time. That would be the best way to go. If you really wanted to learn, you'd go to the Alter Rebbe's Maimer and see how it develops through all the Rabbeim. If you asked me, that would probably be a very interesting study, but that would be quite a project, because you start with a sugya, a mimer, see how that develops, then another mimer. It would be a lot more bigger project, bigger job than one can imagine. So I thought of it as well. I didn't know if this is the right platform for that. That may have to be done in writing. I'm not sure about that. Anyway, so now, from my point of view, every mimer it's like etzem kashetayfes b'miktsaseh tatayfes b'kulei. When you grab an etzem, every part of it holds the whole etzem. So from my point of view, you could take any mimer and enter from there as an entry point into all of Chassidus, the Rebbe's Maimorim as well as the other Rabbeim's Maimorim. So if we wanted to learn any individual mimer, we could always do that. But if you want to have like a type of panorama or comprehensive picture, the Hemshechim of Ayin Beis that we learned, and then Samach Vav and others as well will do that. But I must say, the Rebbe's Maimorim, at the end of the day, especially now that we have a whole bunch of edited Maimorim. Remember, the edited Maimorim themselves, I don't know how many are edited, 60, 70 Maimorim, are only a small fraction of the over 1,000 or 2,000 Maimorim that the Rebbe said over the years. I think it's something of that number. So if you really want to learn all the Rebbe's Maimorim, that's a serious project in itself. But again, that's much more learning individual Maimorim. Anyway, this is not a question of right or wrong or better or worse. You have to make a choice and go with it, and that's that. I would definitely bring the Rebbe's Maimorim into the picture when we're studying something. I would always bring what the Rebbe adds to it. So it's not like we're losing out what the Rebbe says. So there's like pieces in Ayin Beis that I explained that the Rebbe adds to it in his own Maimer, certain emphases and so on. And of course in Samach Vav the same thing you can find. So that's my intention, is to learn it, but through that also see how all the Rabbeim contributed to.
Would you make a distinction in the Rebbe's Chassidus between Malukat, Maimorim Malukat, and the Bilti Muga, meaning you would give priority to the
Malukat? I mean, anything the Rebbe edited in a way is more authoritative, but they're equal in the context of the Rebbe's Torah. They're all part of the Rebbe's Torah. One is just a question of edited or not edited. So a little more authoritative. That's all I would really say. But remember, the Maimorim of the Alter Rebbe and Torah Elukut Torah were also not edited by the Alter Rebbe. Yes, the Manichim were a lot better than us. They were the Mittler Rebbe and the Mariel and some great people, but it was not edited by the Alter Rebbe. Yet it becomes part of the So from my point of view, any mimer from the Rebbe on that topic is worthwhile learning. So there are quite a few non-edited memorim that are very, very fundamental. A lot of them, yes, were turned into edited memorim. Some were edited immediately, some were edited years later. It's hard to qualify the Rebbe's memorim because, as I said, they're individual memorim. But they go more in depth in many topics like tshuva, atzmus, neshamas, Torah. A lot of the very fundamental themes of Chassidus, the Rebbe's Maimorim go deeper into it. But you'll see every Maimer of the Rebbe is based on a Maimer before him. There's sometimes a Friedrich Rebbe's Maimer, sometimes the Rebbe Rashab, sometimes the Alter Rebbe, or the other Rabbeim. And you see it in the footnotes. So that's how I would distinguish. The same thing, different learning a Sikha from the Rebbe that's edited or a Sikha that's not edited. In my work, really they're all equal. Understanding that, of course, an edited one is more authority, more accurate, probably more elaborate. But as far as knowing what the Rebbe wants of us, like when I wrote Toward a Meaningful Life, I read them all. I did not give more value to an edited talk or mimer than to a non-edited one. Like if the Rebbe spoke about education, so yes, there's edited versions where you have more of a formal presentation, but there's a lot of unedited material that's extremely valuable.
One flat final.
Did anybody here ever learn a mimer or a sikha from the Rebbe, the way it was edited and how it is in the unedited version? Did you ever learn something comparable? Like a study in contrast? Anyone here?
Probably I have. Well,
you have?
I guess it's hard to tell. I mean, what you mean something that's Mugadik and the one that's built in Mugadik?
The same sikh or mimer, the way it was written before it was edited and the way it's after it was edited.
No, I can't. If it was published, it was already edited, I'm assuming.
Not necessarily. There's published that are unedited, built in Mugadik.
Oh, yes. I have read. So it's built in Mugadik and Mugadik. I've experienced both.
But did anyone ever study the contrast of the two?
Oh, no, I haven't done that.
Yeah, I would assume, because I have done many, obviously, many. Like, for example, when I look at an edited Maimer or Sikha, I'll always go to its original to see how it was before it was edited. Because sometimes you can see a nuance, you can see things, what changed, what didn't change. So that's like you really want it. But again, this is in-depth study.
I always assume that the footnotes is part of the Rebbe's editing.
No, the whole mimer, not just the footnotes, everything, the whole thing is edited from beginning to end.
But then the Rebbe adds footnotes, no?
Not necessarily. The writers wrote the footnotes as well as the text, and then the Rebbe edited them. And sometimes he added footnotes, sometimes he added in the text itself. Both. Not one more than the other.
Was there ever a dramatic difference between a published Bilti Muga and then the Rebbe did edit it and then you published it with dramatic differences, or were they subtle, more elaborate? But was there anything that changed the understanding?
Yeah, there are quite a few that were changed dramatically. Yes, not always, but there were plenty. I've had myself many of those like that. That the Rebbe said it, and then when you sent it in, either elaborate, whatever the different reasons. Sometimes the Rebbe himself would change something. I mean, this would require going into actual examples, but there are quite a few like that. I'll tell you one famous one. That is actually a controversial one. The Rebbe said in a Farbrengen, this was in the late 60s, 1968. I think it was Shlach. He said that that a Rebbe, like Moshe Rabbeinu, of course is a Nasi of all Jews, but if a Jew goes against Moshe, like in mutineers, like Korach did, or the Meraglim, when he mutineers against his Rebbe, against the Moshe Rabbeinu, how could Moshe protect him? Because he's basically cutting himself off from Moshe's leadership. He's saying, "You're not my leader. I'm not listening to you." So in the Farbrengen, that's something like that. The Rebbe said something pretty sharp like that. When they prepared that talk for editing, the Rebbe literally wrote these words, not exaggerating. The Rebbe wrote, this piece that you wrote should be burned and never seen by anybody, because Chas v'Shalom to say something like that a Rebbe and Moshe would not protect even the people that defied him. So there the Rebbe did say it, whatever the reason was, but then when it came to be written and published, the Rebbe literally said to obliterate it, literally said to burn it. To that extent, he wanted no record of such a thing ever. So you can bring about the two versions and why the Rebbe said it, because obviously, and why he, of course, it was never published and never became part of any theology. So that's an example of a radical change.
Wow.
If you want one.
Yeah, that's pretty radical. One last question for me.
So there you could say, I mean, if you want to farbring about it, you could say the Rebbe first was speaking logically. It's like, if you tell me, I don't want you to protect me, what do you want me to do? Even if I want to protect you, you're like, but then the Rebbe goes a step further, that a Rebbe would find ways to have compassion even on a person like that. It's like the Gemara says, there's a famous story, the Rebbe Rashab and the Frierdiker Rebbe were once speaking, and the Gemara says, Sheita asur l'rachem alav. You're not allowed to have compassion on a fool, on an idiot. So the Rebbe Rashab said to the Frierdiker Rebbe, look how much compassion you need to have on a person that the Torah says you're not allowed to have compassion on him. So I guess there's two levels. There's the level where the Torah is like more law. The law says, a person who's a fool, how could you have compassion? You're just feeding into enabling him. But the Rebbe Rashab went a step further. Says, look how much compassion you need to have on a person that Torah says you shouldn't have compassion. You get it?
Mm-hmm. Didn't Moshe Rabbeinu pray for Korach and all of them till the last minute?
Of course he did. You see, he fell on his face and he had to turn to Hashem. What should he do? He didn't fight with Korach. He was humbled and he wanted to have Moshe was a man of emes. He was looking for the truth. He wasn't looking to get even with anyone. It was ultimately Hashem that make the decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Look, he went up on the Chet Egel. What do you need more than that? We're just coming from the holidays, Yom Kippur and so on. The Jews built a golden calf. You don't get more betrayal than that. False God. And he went up and refused to take no for an answer. It doesn't mean he didn't hold the Jews accountable. It's just two levels. There's two levels. It's basically like tshuva. You're not allowed to sin, but once you do, you have to evoke from a God a deeper compassion. That's how I would explain that story with the Rebbe's two versions, so to speak.
The Rebbe Rashab said to the Frierdiker Rebbe, I feel bad for those people because the Gemara says not to have compassion on them. That's what he meant?
He didn't say those words. He said, look how much compassion you need to have.
Is that what he meant?
On people that the Torah says you shouldn't have compassion on.
I don't understand that. That's the only way I can understand that statement. Is it true?
I just explained it how I understood it.
One last question. For me, a few times, at least once, the Rebbe stated that I think it was Mendel Haradoker should have or would have been included in the line of the Chabad, the Rebbeim, Chassidic Rebbeim. I was wondering if did he ever write anything or contribute anything in Al-Pi Chassidus that was a chiddush by him that would have been interesting to have been included in the Masorah from the Rebbeim?
There are Torahs from him. I think Mendel Haradoker is I think there is a book from him, if I recall correctly. I'm not sure. Well, definitely Torahs that we've heard from him. It's not quite the way you put it that he would have been one of that chain. He had that level where, because before the Alter Rebbe didn't begin his leadership until Mendel Haradoker went to Israel, because he was like a senior student. But I don't know if I wouldn't put him into a category of one of the Rebbeim. Even what you said is more that he was on that stature level, But a year after the Baal Shem Tov passed away, his son took over, and then it was a year later that the Maggid became the Mamal Mokim, the successor. But we don't count him Ritla, the Baal Shem Tov's son. Anyway, but I think he has a sefer. I think it's called, I have to look it up. I think it's pre-something. Is it Mendler or Ducker? I don't remember right now, to be honest.
There's also Pelach Harimon, right? By Rav Hillel Paritcher.
That's Rav Hillel Paritcher. That's Hillel Paritcher. And there's Isaac Homler has Shnei Ma'eris, a whole bunch of Sfarim called Chanariel. Yeah, there are Chassidim that wrote Sfarim. That's a whole other, I didn't go into that.
But they got their
the later years, the Rebbe began to quote from his father as well in Maimorim and in letters on the later years. But we still don't count that as like an 8th or 7th. It had a particular value, the Rebbe's father.
By the way, it's the name of his is called Priya Aretz. You were right.
That's what I said, yeah, Priya Aretz, right.
Are we going to do the CM planning? This is totally off topic, but
Yitzchak is going to schedule a meeting, and we'll make our plan.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, are there any other comments, questions?
Can people who didn't participate in Shahazman Grama also come to the CM?
That's part of the plan, but we want to have as many people that want to participate. Sure, why not?
I plead non-Zman Grama.
What do you mean, non-Zman Grama?
I plead that I'm not, Machoyev in being consistent because I'm female.
That's your call. This is not a mitzvah of Zman Grama. This is a labor of love. Everybody would be welcome and invited, either those that came to this class or didn't. We didn't really plan the details, but why not? I mean, you're celebrating Chassidus. It's not some type of, it's not an elitist club here. We're not anti-Semitic, you know.
Okay, good to know. Thank you.
All Jews, all Chassid, everybody's welcome, men, women, children, just to figure out how to do it, where to do it, what scope, what level. Interesting, I'm already getting a lot of requests about Samach Vav. I guess the word is out. People are going to, I don't know how many people will join in the morning, but definitely people are excited about it.
That's fantastic.
I'm not sure how they found out even. I didn't, besides on this class, didn't really send out anything, but I got at least 3, 4, around 4 or 5 people asking me what's Samach Vav. So I told them we're going to start something. Look, it may even be tomorrow. I mean, I really finished, I think, the overview I wanted to do. I did it actually because we were discussing what to learn. So I felt, let's just discuss what's out there. So we know when we're learning Samach Vav, we're zooming in on one piece of a big Chabad Chassidus picture. And I wish we could learn it all, but you know what? Through Ayin Beis and Samach Vav, we'll get to a lot of stuff from all the other Rabbeim, including the Rebbe. And as we did with Ayin Beis, I'm sure we'll learn other Maimorim as we go along that Samach Vav is based on.
Is there a particular edition of Samach Vav that you're going to be using? Is there multiple?
I might as well use the latest one with the footnotes. I have the earlier one that I use mostly, this one. But there's a much thicker one now. I'll probably use that. But they have their corresponding pages. That's the only real difference. The text is the same, and there's footnotes there. So why not use that? When we learned Ayin Beis, we didn't have the one with footnotes yet. That's probably the one I'm going to use. I have to get it. I have to actually get it. I don't even have it. Yeah.
Maybe people could share in honor of the CM how Hasidus changed their midos or changed their life or what they did differently.
That's part of the discussion we're going to have. What that CM, what that evening or day would look like. Yeah. That's definitely a good idea.
Hopefully, hopefully the CM will be live streamed, also on Zoom or other places, because many of us live in different.
Well, our plan is Yitzchak was going to send out an invitation to everybody, whoever wants to join so-called Siyum committee, where we're going to brainstorm different ideas. You're all welcome to throw them in, either join the meeting or send them in writing, if whatever you're comfortable with. We'll put all the ideas together. I'm happy to do whatever I think consensus is, to figure out a budget, figure out what the objective is. It's exciting to do because we did invest, all of us here, all of you, a lot of time and energy, and we have material to show for it, the recordings, the essay I wrote, etc., and a great opportunity to celebrate Chassidus, especially Ayin Beis, which was like the last frontier that the Rebbe revealed, while he also said it's connected to concerns that he had. So it's all about bringing Mashiach. So I think a siyum like this is not just an excuse to have a party. It's actually a celebration of Chassidus. I would love to have people speaking about Chassidus, effect on their lives. Maybe have some psychologists talk about parallels. Maybe some scientists talk about quantum and Chassidus. I think
That
the
would be
sky's the limit.
fantastic. Yeah, I love that.
Sky's the
Maybe we
limit.
could have a conference. Why don't we have, I know it's a little bit
No.
crazy, but
All
why
ideas, I think, when you come to brainstorm, all ideas should be welcomed, no matter how crazy or not crazy they are. And then you really look at it and you see, what can we do? What should we do? Maybe you do one thing, maybe hopefully it spawns other things. There's a lot of options. When we started Ayin Beis, I created a thing called Club 72. 72 is Ayin Beis, 72.
oh, that's great.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
So maybe we'll have a Club 72 that will go down in history, of a certain group of strange characters that are busy discussing these esoteric ideas and arguing about them.
That's wonderful.
every morning. That's how revolutions are born, no?
Totally.
An underground club. An underground club.
I think that's what we should have named this WhatsApp group, Club 72. Maybe I'll rename it.
Yeah. Okay.
I think that would work.
We've had a lot of good laughs and a lot of good times here. Not just the learning, a lot of kibitzing and also arguing.
I had to step aside
to referee the different tangents we went on.
I had to step away for a moment. Did you mention when exactly you're going to start learning with the Samach Vav?
I just finished the Rebbe to now. Not finished, but I think tomorrow.
Yeah.
Maybe tomorrow.
Okay.
Why not? Eliezer asked, I would use the latest edition, which I don't have. I have to get the volume. The one with all the footnotes. It's the latest edition.
Okay.
But we could also scan it all and put it up as PDFs on our website and on our group. So if somebody doesn't have the book, they can follow there. We'll do that too.
That would be great. Also, when is the Rebbe Rashab's birthday? Isn't it around this time?
Yeah, the 20th of Cheshvan, just in 2 weeks. A little more than 2 weeks, yeah. 20th of Cheshvan. Very fitting. Very fitting. His 166th, 65th birthday. Yeah.
It's also my grandfather's yahrzeit.
There you go. There you go. Chaf Cheshvan, yeah. Yeah, we'll talk about that. Okay. So I think tomorrow we'll begin. I see no reason why not. Okay. We'll stop here. It's a pleasure as always. Let me stop the recording.